The Triplets Who Vanished in 1981, a mother's 30-year fight for the truth. Sometimes, a moment slips through the cracks of memory so quietly, so innocently, you almost convince yourself it never happened. But the heart, especially a mother's heart, remembers what the mind tries to forget. And in a quiet Texas neighborhood, at a birthday party like any other, one woman's past came rushing back, not through words, but through the flash of a green checkered overall and a boy's smile she thought she had buried with time. It had been a warm, golden afternoon in early June, the kind that settled over the rooftops like a memory you didn't know you missed. The Rodriguez backyard was alive with laughter, paper plates filled with melting cake, and a faint smell of barbecue trailing through the air like an old song. Irene Campbell stood quietly near the patio, holding a lukewarm cup of lemonade, her white sun hat casting delicate shadows across the fine lines on her face. She had always carried herself with grace, the kind of elegance that came not from wealth or vanity, but from decades of learning to remain calm in storms no one else could see. Her husband Martin stood nearby, deep in a conversation about fishing and lawn care with the neighborhood men. He chuckled every now and then, that soft, practiced laugh that came with living a quiet life. Irene wasn't really listening to anyone. Her eyes followed the children, their tangled limbs and freckled cheeks, the way they moved so freely, unaware that the world could ever stop spinning. She envied them for that, until it did. The moment was small, so small, in fact, it could have disappeared among the sound of a soda can popping open or a dog barking in the distance. But it didn't. It came wrapped in a boy's energy, a flash of movement, laughter, and green fabric. A man had just arrived late to the party, apologizing as he stepped through the patio door with his young son. "Sorry we're late," he called out casually. "Something came up at home." No one paid much attention. No one, except Irene. The boy, about 8 years old, had broken away from his father's hand like a balloon slipping its string. He ran past the adults and toward the cluster of children playing tag near the swing set. His dark curls bounced with each step, but Irene didn't see the child. She saw the overalls, green, checkered, with yellow straps, paired with a long-sleeved shirt. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, time tore open. Her grip loosened on her cup, and lemonade spilled silently onto the grass. Her feet moved before her brain gave permission. She crossed the yard, breath tight, limbs shaking, eyes fixed on the boy who had now crouched near a sandbox. She reached out, gently, instinctively, placing her hand on his small shoulder. "Where did you get those clothes?" she whispered. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried like a breeze before a storm. The boy jerked away, his eyes widened, startled, uncertain. "Daddy!" he shouted, voice rising with fear, scrambling backward toward the man who had just arrived. The father turned, immediately protective, stepping between his son and Irene. "Is everything okay?" he asked cautiously, one hand now on his son's chest. Irene didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were on the overalls, down to the way the fabric creased near the knees. Her hand hovered mid-air, trembling, as if still feeling the ghost of a touch. Martin noticed the scene unfolding and rushed over. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, wrapping an arm around his wife's shoulder. She didn't mean to frighten him. It's just your son's outfit. It's exactly what our boys wore. Our sons, Martin clarified, his voice quieter now. They were triplets. They went missing in 1981, the day they disappeared. They were wearing green checkered overalls with yellow straps, just like those. The yard fell quiet. Neighbors nearby had turned their heads, their conversations halting mid-sentence. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. The man's expression shifted. His face softened into concern. I had no idea, he said slowly. We bought these at a department store a few months back. I didn't know. Irene still hadn't moved, still hadn't blinked. She stared at the boy's clothes the way you stare at something sacred and broken at the same time. Please, she said, her voice cracking. Can I just see the label? I need to know if it's the same brand. Martin gently pulled her back. Honey, he said, his voice low but steady. He's not Lucas or Noah or Gabriel. Let's not upset him more. Mrs. Rodriguez, the hostess, stepped forward, placing a hand softly on Irene's arm. Maybe you should rest, Irene. You look pale. Martin nodded, grateful. Yes, I think that's best. He turned to the man and boy. We're truly sorry. The boy, still clutching his father's shirt, looked over once before being led away. His curls shimmered in the sunlight. Irene watched them go, her chest rising and falling like something trying not to break. On the slow walk home, Martin held her hand tightly, his thumb tracing small circles into her palm. It was a gesture of grounding, one he had used since the very first night after their boys disappeared. That night, 30 years ago, when silence had filled every corner of their home like a second loss. Back inside the house, Irene sat on the sofa, her shoulders curled inward. Martin moved to the kitchen and returned with tea, chamomile, because it was what she reached for in grief. I didn't mean to scare that child, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw those overalls. And for a moment, Martin sat beside her, his eyes glassy. I know. I can't forget them, Martin. I can't stop seeing them, even after all this time. You're not supposed to forget, he said gently. They were our boys. You gave them life. She turned to him, a tear rolling down her cheek. Do you ever think maybe we missed something? Maybe there was a detail, a clue. Martin didn't answer, not because he disagreed, but because he had asked himself the same thing for 3 decades. Irene sat up straighter. I want to look at their photos, the ones where they wore those clothes. I need to see if I'm wrong. I need to know if I'm just losing my mind. Martin hesitated. They're in the box, in the attic. We haven't opened it in years. Please, she said, if it'll help me calm down. He sighed, but nodded. As he rose and moved toward the hallway, Irene leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't peace. It was something else, the kind of quiet that waits. She didn't know it yet, but that boy, that outfit, that fleeting moment of recognition, it wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a mistake. It was the first fracture in a 30-year silence. And somewhere inside that attic, beneath layers of dust and memory, was a photograph that had waited just as long for someone to see what had always been there. The attic door groaned open with the sound of 1,000 nights forgotten. Martin reached up, tugging the frayed pull string with the same hesitation one might use to touch a gravestone. The wooden ladder unfolded slow and stiff, as if reluctant to offer passage. Dust shimmered in the single beam of light that pierced the hallway air, and Irene stood below, her fingers clasped tight around a chipped porcelain mug. She hadn't spoken since he left the room. Her eyes hadn't moved from the staircase. Martin climbed the steps, like someone approaching a memory too big to hold. The attic was small, just enough space for boxes and old regrets. He knew exactly which one to find. It sat in the far right corner, beneath a faded blue tarp and a bundle of forgotten Christmas lights. The cardboard had sagged from decades of humidity, its edges browned like old bread. A single word, written in his own hand decades ago, marked the top, boys. He paused before lifting it, not out of doubt, but reverence. Then, with a quiet breath, he carried the box down the ladder, each step heavier than the last. Irene didn't reach for it. She only looked, her lips pressed thin, her jaw clenched. Martin set it gently on the coffee table and wiped the dust with a trembling hand. For a long moment, neither of them moved. And then, together, they opened it. The smell hit first. Old paper, worn fabric, a trace of soap from another lifetime. Irene reached in as if touching something holy. A tiny baseball glove with initials scribbled in marker, LGM. A trio of identical stuffed animals, each one with a different colored ribbon. Crayon drawings of castles and cars, math worksheets with gold stars. Every item weighed more than it should. And at the very bottom, beneath a folded flannel blanket, was the album. It was a heavy, leather-bound thing, its edges softened with time. Martin picked it up, but it was Irene who opened it. The first photo was of the hospital, 3 newborns swaddled and blinking at the camera. Then came first birthdays, Halloween costumes, a beach trip where they built a sandcastle with their names etched in the moat. Gabriel, the smallest, had always insisted on doing things backward. He wore his shirt inside out more often than not. Noah, the quiet one, was already helping the others fix their shoelaces. And Lucas had that smile, that wild, uninhibited joy that lit up the room before he even said a word. They turned page after page slowly, carefully, the way archaeologists might unearth a lost temple, and then they stopped. The photo was almost too ordinary. The 3 boys stood in front of their house, dressed in matching green checkered overalls with yellow straps over long-sleeved shirts, their arms draped over one another's shoulders, grinning into the camera. "This was taken the morning they disappeared," Martin said, voice husky. "Exactly an hour before." Irene leaned in. Her hand touched the image. "Look at the fabric," she whispered. "Look at the way it sits at the knee. The boy at the party, his were similar, but not the same. This green is richer. The straps, thicker, vintage." Martin nodded. "It's the same design, but not the same garment." She rubbed her eyes. "Still, I can't let go of how it felt. The shock. My heart knew before my eyes did." Martin placed the album on his lap. "We're allowed to remember, but we can't let ghosts make promises." Irene looked up sharply. "What if they weren't ghosts?" The room fell silent again. She stood slowly, her knees stiff, but her focus clear. "Do you remember that Cadillac Lucas used to obsess over? He talked about it every day after school. Said it looked like a spaceship." Martin frowned. "Mr. Fielding's Cadillac, deep red, chrome trim, always polished." "Exactly," she said. pulling the photo close to her face. Look there, at the far left corner, behind the neighbor's fence. Isn't that the hood of a Cadillac? Martin leaned forward. The shape was subtle, mostly obscured, but unmistakable. The curved front, the glint of metal, his pulse quickened. It is, he muttered. It's his. Irene's voice dropped. But Alan Fielding left town a week before they disappeared. We had a farewell party for him at the school. I remember the cake, the gift from the PTA. Martin stared harder at the photo, his fingers tracing the faint outline of the car. If this was taken the morning they vanished, and that's his car, then he was still here. Irene stepped back, folding her arms as if trying to hold herself together. Which means he lied. Martin rummaged through the box again, pulling out the original photo envelope. On the outside, printed in bold black ink, was the Photolab stamp, developed June 14th, 1981. 2 days after the boys vanished. It confirmed everything. Irene turned pale. He was still here. He never left. Martin didn't know what to say. His hands clutched the envelope tighter. The idea of Fielding, respected, beloved, trusted, being there that day, opened a hole too dark to look into. Irene's voice turned cold. The police never interviewed him, because they thought he was already gone. Martin placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. We don't know what it means yet. It means, she said, eyes fixed on the photo, that someone we trusted was near our boys in their final hour, and no one thought to question it. The air in the room felt thinner now, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Irene took the photo, slipped it into a protective sleeve, and set it beside her on the table. We have to find out where he is, she said. We have to know what else he lied about. Martin nodded, but there was a tremor behind his quiet strength. Are you sure you want to open that door? I never closed it, she said. And somewhere deep in her chest, under layers of grief and memory, something shifted, like a compass beginning to realign. Because maybe, just maybe, the past hadn't buried itself. Maybe it had only been waiting to be seen again. The next morning, the house was quiet in the way only old grief could make it. Irene stood by the kitchen window, watching sunlight drift lazily across the fence. Her tea sat untouched on the counter. The photo album remained on the table in the living room, open to the page that had stolen her sleep. Beside it lay the photograph she had placed in a plastic sleeve the night before, its corners trembling slightly every time she passed by. She didn't say anything when Martin came in. He didn't ask if she'd slept. Instead, he laid his phone on the counter and pulled up a simple web page. There's still a listing, he said softly. Alan Fielding, registered founder of a nonprofit farm charity called Haven for Hope. It's located about 90 miles out, near the state line. Irene walked over slowly. The screen showed a banner with a group of young boys smiling in a cornfield, their hands muddy, their faces radiant. It looks... She paused, searching for the word, innocent. Martin tilted his head. Too innocent. There was a contact email, no phone number, no public donor list, no staff directory, just an address and a mission statement about healing young men through land and community. Irene tapped her fingers against the countertop, one by one, like someone calling back time. Then she whispered, "Let's go." Martin glanced at her. Today? If we wait, she said, I might lose the courage. He didn't argue. 90 minutes later, After stopping to fuel the car and gather the old photo envelope and album, they were on the road. The highway stretched long and empty, lined with fields and rusted mailboxes. Irene kept the album in her lap the entire time, her eyes never quite leaving the corner of the picture that held the Cadillac. Martin spoke occasionally, small phrases meant to ground her. "We'll just talk. We're not accusing anyone yet. We don't know what he remembers. We're only looking for peace." But Irene didn't want peace. She wanted truth. As they turned off the main road onto a gravel driveway, a wooden sign creaked in the breeze. "Haven for Hope, a place to begin again." A long path led them past hayfields and tool sheds to a modest white farmhouse flanked by two red barns. The land was quiet, almost too quiet for midday. They parked and stepped out, their feet crunching against gravel. A young man, maybe in his early 20s, emerged from one of the barns. He wore work boots, a straw hat, and a navy shirt stained with dirt. He smiled as he approached. "Hello there," he called, waving. "Can I help you folks?" Martin stepped forward. "We're looking for Mr. Alan Fielding." The young man nodded. "He's out at the county fair today with most of the kids and staff. There's a big event. We've got a booth there all week." Irene's shoulders tensed. "Do you know when he'll be back?" "Probably not until evening," the man said. "But you're welcome to look around. I can give you a quick tour if you'd like." They exchanged a glance. Martin nodded. "Yes, we'd appreciate that." As they followed the young man, who introduced himself as Matteo, he spoke proudly about the program. How the farm helped boys from difficult backgrounds, most of them immigrant or orphaned. How Mr. Fielding had created everything from scratch 2 decades ago. Irene listened carefully, but her eyes scanned every face that passed by. Every door left ajar. When they reached the smaller barn, Matteo smiled. "This one's special. It's for the younger boys. We let them paint and build and get messy. Kind of a creativity hub." The exterior of the barn was covered in childlike murals, handprints, rainbows, animals with oversized eyes. Inside, the walls were decorated with collages made of dry leaves, grains of rice, pasta shells, and paper cutouts. At one end of the room, a man knelt beside a table, arranging materials, small clay pots, gardening tools, seed packets. He looked up as they entered. Late 30s, perhaps 40, pale skin, curly black hair, and a smile so wide and bright it knocked the wind from Irene's chest. "I'm Sean," he said warmly, wiping his hands on a towel and offering it to shake. "Activities coordinator. Welcome to Haven." Martin shook his hand. "I'm Martin. This is my wife, Irene. We were hoping to see Mr. Fielding." Sean's expression shifted to apologetic. "Sorry to miss him. He's out at the fair all day, amens. But I'm happy to show you around or answer questions. I've been here since I was a kid. Mr. Fielding took me in when I was 6. Irene blinked. "You've lived here since you were 6? He nodded proudly. "I owe everything to this place. To him." Her voice trembled. "Do you have siblings?" Sean looked momentarily surprised. "Yes. 2 brothers. One works with Mr. Fielding directly, the other lives nearby. We're triplets." Irene gasped. Martin stepped closer to steady her. She swallowed hard. "Would you mind if I asked one more question?" Sean smiled. "Of course." She gestured toward a large collage hanging near the window. It was a car, meticulously crafted with rice, corn husks, and glitter. A red Cadillac. It shimmered like the memory that haunted her sleep. "That's beautiful," she said softly. Did one of the children make that? Sean chuckled. Actually, I did. I made it as a sample for the kids. Mr. Fielding still has that car. He loves it. Irene's lips parted, but no words came. She stared at Sean, at his wide smile, his voice, his dark curls. Her mind flooded with images. Lucas dancing in the hallway in that green overall. Lucas pointing at a toy car. Lucas yelling Cadillac every time one passed by on the street. It couldn't be, and yet it was. Her bones knew it before her brain allowed the possibility. Sean noticed her expression. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She forced a smile, one she could barely hold. "You just remind me of someone, from long ago." He smiled again, softer now. That happens sometimes. But Irene knew this wasn't just resemblance. It was recognition. On the way back to the car, she walked slower. Each step felt like a string pulling her closer to something she thought had been buried forever. As they drove away, she clutched the photo tighter in her hands and whispered, "Sean is Lucas." And there were still two more to find. The county fair bustled with the noise of small-town joy. Children squealing on rusted rides, country music floating from the main stage, and the smell of kettle corn hanging thick in the late summer air. Irene and Martin stood just beyond the main entrance, surrounded by laughter that somehow made the knot in their stomachs tighter. This wasn't the place you expected to find the truth about a 30-year-old abduction. And yet, here they were. They moved together, quietly scanning the crowd. Irene carried her purse like it was sacred. Inside were the photographs, the only real thread she had between then and now. Martin had one hand on her back the whole time, guiding gently, not saying much. He knew her face now, when her eyes narrowed, when her breath shortened, when she forgot to blink. It was the look of a mother walking toward fire. They passed a booth with a hand-painted sign, "Haven for Hope, Healing Through Earth." A smiling teenager handed out flyers to curious fairgoers, while a group of young boys offered handmade bracelets and potted succulents. Behind the display stood a modest tent, lined with educational posters and large photo boards. One board, in particular, stopped Irene in her tracks. 3 boys, maybe 10 years old, shoulder to shoulder, grinning into the sun. Their clothes were dusty, their smiles big, and in the background stood that same red barn from the farm. Beneath the photo was a caption that read, "Sean, Victor, and Marco, our first 3 sons, our first family." Irene reached forward and touched the name Marco with her fingertip. Her voice caught. "He's the one we haven't seen," she whispered. "Gabriel, that's him." Martin leaned in. "He's here somewhere." They didn't have to wait long. From behind the tent, a man emerged, tall, lean, with sharper features than Sean, but the same dark curls and startling blue eyes. He wore a badge clipped to his shirt. "Marco Fielding, Outreach Director." Irene stared. She didn't need a DNA test. No scientific confirmation. Her soul had already whispered it into the marrow of her bones. She turned to Martin. "I need to talk to him." But before she could step forward, another voice called out from across the tent. "Marco, the guest speaker's almost ready. We're moving to the main stage in 5 minutes." Marco nodded and stepped away quickly, heading toward a larger white tent at the edge of the field. Irene's heart sank. She didn't want to cause a scene. Not here. Not in public. And yet, how do you wait when your missing child walks right past you? Martin looked toward the speaker stage. Let's just follow, quietly. They blended into the crowd, weaving past lemonade stands and hay bale photo booths until they reached the edge of the performance area. A small wooden stage had been set up with folding chairs facing it. The sign read, Faith and Forgiveness, a conversation with Alan Fielding. He walked onto the stage a few minutes later. Time had changed Alan. His once dark hair was now a crown of silver, his posture slightly hunched. But Irene saw it instantly. That same half-smile he used to give at church. The way he folded his hands behind his back like a preacher, ready to deliver gospel. It wasn't just his voice that commanded attention. It was the carefully curated warmth in it, the illusion of safety. As the host introduced him, Alan stepped up to the microphone and began. 30 years ago, I had nothing but a broken heart and an empty house. I asked the Lord for one thing. Give me someone to pour my life into. And the Lord delivered, not once, but 3 times. He gave me sons, not born of my body, but of my calling. The crowd applauded gently. Irene's hands balled into fists. Alan continued. These boys came to me through pain, through silence, through abandonment, and they became my purpose. I've raised dozens since then, but Sean, Victor, and Marco, they were my beginning, and I believe in beginnings. Irene stood up. Martin grabbed her arm gently, but it was too late. She moved down the side aisle, approaching the edge of the stage. Her voice was low, but clear. Did you ever ask if they had someone before you? Alan faltered mid-sentence. His gaze met hers, and a flicker, only a flicker, crossed his face. I'm sorry, ma'am. You found them, she said, stepping closer, on a hillside near Elk Grove Park. Green overalls, blue t-shirt, striped socks. You didn't find abandoned boys. You found my sons. A hush fell over the crowd. The MC looked helplessly between them. Marco, who had been standing just off stage, now moved forward. Confusion painted across his face. Alan raised a hand as if calming a wave. Irene Campbell, he said. Now it was the crowd that gasped. You remember me, she whispered. I remember everything, Alan said quietly, and I remember what I gave them. Love, shelter, purpose. You gave them new names, she said. But you never erased the old ones, did you? Sean stepped forward from the crowd, as if drawn by instinct. Victor followed, his brows furrowed. Marco stood frozen, not yet understanding. Irene's voice cracked. Sean, your name is Lucas. Victor, you are Noah, and you... She turned to Marco. Gabriel, my baby, you had a birthmark under your left ear. Do you still have it? Marco touched his neck unconsciously. In that moment, something broke. Not in anger, not in violence, but in time itself. 3 men stood before her, not boys anymore, not victims, but sons lost in a fog of memory, held together by the same lie. Alan took a step back. I saved them, he said, but now the words sounded hollow. Irene stepped forward, pulling the photo from her bag and holding it out. I never stopped waiting, she said. The crowd murmured. Phones were raised. Somewhere, someone began calling the sheriff's office. But for Irene, nothing else mattered. Because Lucas's eyes were brimming with tears, and Victor had stepped toward her, shaking. Marco, voice barely a whisper, said, Why didn't anyone ever look for us? Irene answered, with everything in her. We never stopped. And as the fair continued around them, with its lights and laughter and music. A different kind of reunion began, one born not of celebration, but of reckoning. And Alan Fielding was no longer the man who saved boys. He was the man who never let them go. The sheriff's cruiser arrived 15 minutes later, silent except for the dust cloud trailing it. By then, a crowd had gathered, not to cheer, not to celebrate, but to witness. Witness what? They didn't know. Only that something sacred had cracked open between a grieving woman and three grown men who looked like they were waking up from the longest dream of their lives. Deputy Holland stepped out of the vehicle first. He was in his 40s, stern, but not cruel, and held the radio like it was an extension of his hand. A younger officer followed, eyes bouncing between the murmuring crowd and the pale, trembling man standing on the stage. Alan Fielding, the local philanthropist, the father figure, the man who had been praised in newspapers, thanked in community bulletins, and trusted without question. Until now. Irene stood beside her sons, or the men who had once been her sons. Lucas, Sean, had already called her ma'am twice, each time with hesitation, like the word mom was a fragile crystal he didn't know how to hold. Noah remained quiet, arm looped protectively through his brothers. Gabriel, once Marco, looked like someone trying to breathe underwater. Alan didn't run. He didn't argue. He just sat down on the edge of the stage, hands resting on his knees, as if waiting for some divine accounting to arrive and tally his debts. Deputy Holland approached Irene first. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside for a moment." She shook her head. "No, I'm not leaving them again." Holland's expression softened. "I promise you, you won't. But we need to understand what happened here, where these men came from, and how they got here." Martin stepped in. "We have photos, birth certificates, missing person reports from 1981, all filed in Sacramento County." That got Holland's attention. He turned to one of the younger officers. "Get Sacramento on the line. Ask for any open cases under the Campbell family name. 3 boys reported missing in the early 80s. Alan raised his voice. Not angry, but eerie in its calm. "There's no point calling. No one will find charges. No one will find fault. The system already forgot about them. I just filled the silence." The deputy glanced at him. "You took children. I gave them purpose. You took them from their mother. They were left alone." Lucas finally spoke. "We weren't. Not the way you think." All eyes turned to him. "I remember," he said, "a park. I remember chasing a kite. And then someone calling us. Not Mom. A woman. She said she'd show us magic. That our mom would be there too." Irene covered her mouth. Gabriel added, "I remember the van. It smelled like cinnamon and rubber, and the windows had curtains." Alan's hands twitched. Noah's voice was more brittle. "He wasn't the one who took us. He found us. At the shelter. After the fire." Holland looked up. "What fire?" Lucas winced. "They burned the place down. The house we were in, I think it was in Arizona. Someone said they'd report them, and they just left us there. A woman died. I remember the smoke." Alan nodded slowly. "They were dumped at a halfway home in Tucson. I was preaching nearby. One of the nurses knew my mission and called me. Said 3 boys showed up with matching birthmarks and fear in their bones." "You never tried to find their family," Martin said. "I was told they had no one," Alan replied, more to himself than to anyone else. "And I believed it. Maybe because it was easier." Gabriel stepped forward now, voice shaking. You gave us new names. You told us God had rewritten our past, that remembering it was dangerous. Alan didn't deny it, because it was, because sometimes the truth cuts deeper than forgetting. Irene walked toward him, close now, her eyes full of salt and rage and 30 years of silence. You don't get to decide what truth they live with. You don't get to rewrite pain just because it fits your story. For the first time, Alan's face cracked. He looked old, not in years, but in weight, in wear. They smiled, he whispered. They laughed. They grew up good. They grew up without knowing who they were, she snapped, without knowing they were wanted, that someone had lit a candle every night waiting for their names to come home. The crowd was silent now. Even the teenagers had stopped recording. Noah finally stepped forward and took Irene's hand. Lucas followed. Gabriel lingered, looking back at Alan once. I don't know if I forgive you, he said, but I know I don't belong to you anymore. Alan didn't reply. Deputy Holland stepped in. Mr. Fielding, I'm placing you under investigation for unlawful guardianship, obstruction of identity, and potential abduction. You have the right to remain silent. The words echoed in Irene's ears, but she was no longer focused on Alan. Her eyes were locked on the three men before her. Her sons, lost and reclaimed. Their timelines didn't match anymore. They had tattoos, jobs, names she hadn't chosen. But in that moment, when Gabriel put his arm around Lucas, and Noah reached for Martin's shoulder like it was second nature, Irene knew something deeper than DNA had returned. Love. Not the kind you carry in photo frames, but the kind that survives forgetting. As the police escorted Alan away and the sun began its slow descent beyond the fairground tents, Martin turned to Irene and asked, "What now?" She didn't answer immediately. She was staring at the three of them. Grown men, yes, but still somehow the boys she once sang to sleep. And finally she said, "Now, we start again. But this time, together." The house smelled like lemon oil and thyme. As Irene pushed open the creaking door to their old home, the evening sun poured in through the lace curtains, splashing the walls in gold like some quiet blessing. Dust danced in the beams of light, and on the shelf above the fireplace, 3 picture frames waited, untouched since 1981. Lucas stepped in first. He paused near the doorway, uncertain, as if crossing the threshold might shatter whatever fragile thing had just begun between them. Noah followed behind, steady and quiet, his eyes tracing the staircase like a memory was perched on each step. Gabriel hesitated the longest. He ran his fingers along the doorframe, the wood worn down in the exact spot where a child's head used to bump it every time he grew another inch. "This was ours?" he asked softly. Martin nodded. "Always was." No one spoke for a while. They just moved slowly through the living room, like explorers in an abandoned temple, touching the past, letting it whisper. On the mantel sat the same jar of marbles they used to fight over. In the corner, an old rocking chair creaked once, as if remembering someone who used to sit in it and hum lullabies to restless boys. In the kitchen, Irene opened a drawer and pulled out a folded paper towel. Inside were 3 tiny coins, each wrapped in a child's scrawl. She handed them out one by one. "You boys once gave me these," she said, her voice trembling. "You said they were pirate treasure, payment for being the best mom in the world." Lucas looked down at the coin in his hand and blinked away tears. "I used to believe we'd grow old here, all 3 of us. That we'd still be brothers, still eat cereal in our pajamas, Still wrestle for the last pancake. Noah smiled faintly. We can still wrestle for pancakes. Might throw our backs out, but they laughed, not a full laugh, but the kind that slips out before the ache catches up to it. Martin pulled out a photo album, one that hadn't been opened in decades. He laid it on the table. They gathered around, turning page after page. Birthdays, camping trips, Christmas mornings. Irene watched their faces as they traced fingers over images of a life they were robbed of, but somehow still belonged to. At one photo, a grainy shot of the boys sitting on the porch in overalls, popsicles in hand, Gabriel froze. That was the day I lost my tooth, he whispered. You gave me $1 and a cherry soda. You remembered, Irene said. Gabriel nodded. Not everything was gone, it was just buried. Outside, the wind stirred the chimes on the porch. The sound was hauntingly familiar. Later that night, Martin lit a fire in the hearth. They made hot cocoa, awkwardly, spilling a little, laughing too much. Noah sat with a blanket around his shoulders. Lucas helped Irene wash dishes while Gabriel poked at the fire like he was coaxing warmth back into bones that had waited too long to feel at home. And then, as the flames crackled low, Irene stood. I need to say something. They all turned to her. I don't want to pretend that 30 years didn't happen. I don't expect you to erase what you've lived or forget who raised you during that time. I know I can't ask to be your mother again, like we're picking up where we left off. But I do want to know you now. Not as the children I lost, but as the men you are. I want to meet you all over again, if you'll let me. Gabriel looked at his brothers. Lucas took her hand. We'd like that, he said. Noah nodded. One day at a time. Gabriel smiled. Starting now? They didn't hug all at once. They didn't fall into each other like the end of a movie. But they stayed. Stayed through the awkward silences, stayed through the tears that came at strange moments, stayed through the stories that began with I remember, and the ones that ended with long pauses. A week passed, then two. Neighbors brought casseroles. A reporter knocked, and they declined the interview. The sheriff's office called. It would take months, maybe years, to process the legal threads of what happened. Alan had posted bail, but the public pressure was mounting. The truth had found sunlight. It would not be buried again. But for Irene, the most important trial had already ended. She had her boys back. One morning, Gabriel came into the kitchen with a new photo, taken the night before. The four of them sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a single quilt. He pinned it next to the old photo of them with popsicles. No more gaps, he said. And Irene, who had lived for so long with empty arms and unanswered prayers, finally allowed herself to breathe. Because what she had lost had never truly died. It had wandered, and it had suffered. But love, real love, waited. Through smoke, through silence, through names that weren't hers, and birthdays that came and went. Love waited, and now it had come home.